I was watching when my brother died. Most people don't even think he's dead now. But I'm not talking about the man walking around in his skin today. I'm talking about 4 years ago, on a night when the air felt like frozen glass. We had run out of gas, stranded in a neighborhood that felt like a labyrinth designed to keep people lost. We were walking those 5 blocks to find a station. The silence of the street heavy and suffocating, when I realized we weren't alone. I'm talking about the people that began following us, like hyenas, scenting weak, trembling prey, trailing behind us until they finally drove us into a lonely, dead-end alley. I'm talking about my brother, Eric, dying to save me, and the nightmare that festered in the wake of that violence. Eric was 10 years older than me, a man built from hard work and responsibility. He'd been a plumber's apprentice since 16, and by the time I was graduating college, he had a wife, 2 kids, and a life that felt like a different universe. When I asked him for work, he was skeptical. He saw me as the kid, the student with his head in the clouds. I was interested in comparative literature, and he just grinned, wondering if I shouldn't find a desk job in a nice, warm office instead. But he loved me. He was my best friend. He finally relented, and surprisingly, I found a rhythm in the work. A month in, I was handling small jobs, and Eric was actually proud. That pride turned to ash the day we sat outside Eleanor Buckley's house. She was an elderly woman, fragile and plagued by health issues. And when her pipes burst, she had begged us to fix them before her doctor's appointment. We did, but it kept us late. By the time we finished, the sun had bled out of the sky. It was my fault I'd been so tired, so distracted, that I didn't monitor the gas. We sputtered out 2 miles away in a part of town I'd never seen. Eric tried to play it off, saying it wasn't a big deal, that we'd just walked to a station. I offered to go alone, but he shook his head. He wanted to keep me safe. He told me people were less likely to mess with 2 men. I hated that I felt safer just because he was there. But I let him lead me into the cold. We had only walked 2 blocks when the hairs on my neck stood up. First, an older man. Then a woman fell into step behind us. Across the street, a teenager mirrored our pace, his gaze locked on us like a laser. I whispered to Eric, my voice cracking, "I think we're being followed." I expected him to brush it off, but his jaw was tight, his eyes hard. "I know," he whispered back. "I don't get why, though." We picked up our pace, our breath hitching in the frigid air. By now, there were 6 of them, then 8. When 2 larger men blocked our path ahead, Eric shoved me down a side street. We were trapped. "There's a fence," Eric breathed, his voice raw with fear. "I can boost you over. You have to be fast." I refused to leave him, but he squeezed my arm with a strength that terrified me. "I'll be right behind you. Go." He shoved me against a chain link. I scrambled up, my fingers tearing on the jagged metal, and as I hit the top, I saw the mob slam into him. I fell to the wet asphalt on the other side, and then I heard Eric screaming for me to run, to call the cops. The teenagers slugged him, and the mob dragged him to the ground. The old man, the one who started it all, crawled over my brother. He had a crimson thread of blood running from his eye, a ghastly, puppet-like smile frozen on his face. He pressed his eye against Eric's socket. I watched, frozen, as my brother went silent. Then, one by one, they took turns. A woman, then a large man, each pressing their faces into his. Eric lay there, staring blankly at the night sky. I didn't climb back. I didn't save him. I ran until I found a bus station and hid in the bathroom, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. When the police finally took me back to that alley, there was nothing. No blood, no Eric, just empty street. His wife, Zoe, vouched for me, her eyes filled with a terror that mirrored my own. We went to their home, and she showed me the security footage. Eric had walked into his house at 9:30, grabbed a suitcase, and vanished. The police closed the case, convinced he'd just walked out on his life. For 4 years, we lived in the shadow of that mystery. Zoe and I drifted apart, the guilt and the suspicion poisoning everything. Then, 2 nights ago, the world ended. Zoe and my 2 nieces were murdered. They were found tied to the floor, their backs carved with rectangles doors. When the detective called, his voice was heavy. "Have you seen your brother?" he asked. I hadn't. I was in Sacramento, miles away, at the library. I'm packing to fly out for the funerals. My mind a poisonous soup of grief when the doorbell rings. My heart slams against my ribs. I look through the peephole, and there he is, Eric. I reach for the knob, a part of me wanting to be punished for leaving him, but I stop. "Eric, what are you doing here?" I call out. He smiles, and I see the blood caked at the corner of his left eye. "Coming to visit my brother," he says. "Let me in." I refuse. I threaten to call the police. He just leans into the lens, his face twitching. "I'd try you, but we need you for something else," he whispers. "Invite me in." The cops came and went, finding nothing. They told me to leave town, to get to the funeral. Maybe that would throw him off. I'm sitting in the bathroom of Terminal D now, writing this. It's cleaner than the one where I hid 4 years ago, but the fear is colder. It started the moment I passed security. People are watching me, staring. They're outside the door now, breathing in the quiet of the room. I can see their shoes under the stall. They're excited. They're waiting. I'm sending this to you, Zoe's little sister, because I need you to know. They're tired of waiting. The door is opening. If Eric or I come to your door, please don't let us in. The year was 2014, and I was a cocky high school student in Central Texas. My older brother was in Colorado, and since our spring breaks had finally coincided, I was desperate to make the long drive to see him. I wasn't supposed to be driving. I'd been caught drinking with friends just a week earlier, and my license had been suspended for 30 days. But I was 18 and an indomitable idiot. I convinced myself that if I just took the back roads and avoided the state troopers, I would disappear. Fueled by cheap energy drinks and a reckless pursuit of freedom, I set out at the end of the day. I was weaving through vast, uninhabited stretches of the state that felt more like the barren Australian outback than Texas. By midnight, the world was within my headlights. The landscape was nothing but endless, tangled bushes and road markings, worn down by time and the heat of the sun to the point that they were practically white paper. I was so consumed by the feeling of extreme, crushing loneliness that I almost missed the orange traffic cone. It was placed right in the middle of the yellow median. I slowed down, my heart rate increasing. There was no construction going on in the area. I had looked at the map, and there were supposed to be warning signs a few miles ahead. It seemed intentional, a distinct, sharp sign on a forgotten road. A few miles later, my high beams cut through the darkness and revealed another unusual thing in my lane. I squinted, my foot dangling on the brake. It was a cone too, but the closer I got, The stranger its shape seemed much thicker, much more organic. When the light finally fell on it, my stomach twisted. It was a man. I swerved into the oncoming lane, but he mimicked my movements. He wasn't just walking. He was hunting, his arm outstretched as if welcoming the impact of my bumper. I slammed on the brakes so hard my neck twisted, my breath caught in my throat. I peered out as the car came to a screeching halt, my initial confusion hardening into a fierce, instinctive rage. The man was tall, middle-aged, and wearing a long brown coat that seemed out of place in this desolate wilderness. His face was ordinary, save for a pair of icy blue eyes that seemed quite small for his head. He didn't seem grateful to see me stop. He gave me a wide, predatory grin. Then I saw what he was holding. Wriggling in his fist was something small, hairy, and slippery with black liquid. It looked like a dead mouse or something more sinister. He had his other hand hidden behind his back, and a sudden, irrational fear of a hidden weapon gripped me. I didn't wait to find out what he was hiding. I jerked the car forward to get past him, but he was back in my way. As he moved, his hand dropped, and the flash of a heavy hammer caught the light. I didn't think anything of it. I accelerated. I glanced in my rearview mirror as we sped away. Before night could swallow him, I saw him start to run. I laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. Damn fool, I thought. You can't catch a car. The irony of the universe was cruel. The words had barely left my mouth when my car shuddered with a horrible, metallic thud. There was a rapid succession of pops, sharp, like gunshots. My dashboard lit up with a frantic flash of warning lights, and the car began to veer wildly to the left. I fought to hold on to the steering wheel, and the tires were tearing themselves apart on the asphalt, shuddering rhythmically until I was forced to grind to a halt. I took the flashlight from the glove box and staggered out, my hand shaking so much that the beam of light danced like crazy on the road. Every tire was gone, the rubber strips shriveling up like dead, blackened skin. 50 meters back, I saw it, a spike strip, half hidden in the weeds. I was alone, limp, and far from civilization. I knew with a bone-chilling certainty that he was coming. I had maybe 5 minutes. My phone was a useless brick, no network. I looked at the dark, vast fields on either side of the road, but there was nowhere to hide, and I was terrified of being cornered in the bushes. My only option was to keep going. I locked my nearly immobile car, grabbed my wallet and phone, and started running. I was a cross-country runner. I had plenty of endurance. I would keep running until I saw a car. I turned back to check my progress. He was climbing the hill, less than a quarter of a mile behind me. His gait was nauseating long, sloppy legs, as if he were floating over the road. He looked like a character plucked from a nightmare. I started running at a steady pace, my eyes constantly darting from shoulder to shoulder, wed for a heartbeat, and my heart soared only for the driver to veer around me without a glance and disappear into the darkness. I was left in the dust, my rage almost eclipsing my terror. But when I looked back, the road behind me was empty. Had he turned back, or had I finally lost my mind? I kept walking until I saw a red Dodge Charger parked on the shoulder. It was dark, the engine dead, but the tires were pristine. I checked the door. It was unlocked. The keys were in the ignition. I slid into the seat, a sob of relief catching in my throat as the engine roared to life. I was going to make it, but as I glanced out the passenger window, the relief vanished, replaced by a cold, numbing horror. The man wasn't on the road anymore. He had been running in a wide arc through the fields, a silent, pale blur closing the distance. He had anticipated my flight path. He was yards away, his fingers nearly brushing the handle as I slammed my foot on the gas and tore away, leaving him a grinning, static blur in my side mirror. I didn't stop until I hit the police station in the next town. When the sun finally rose and they escorted me back to my car, the reality of the violence set in every window had been obliterated, yet nothing had been stolen. But there is a part of that night I haven't told anyone. When I first reached that red Charger, the door was open. My flashlight beam cut through the dark cabin and revealed a slaughterhouse. Blood was smeared across the wheel, the gear shift, the seat. The windshield was cracked from the inside. A dark, heavy streak of red trailed from the open door into the weeds. I followed the trail until my light caught on something misshapen. A man was lying there, his mouth frozen in a silent scream, his skull bashed into a jagged crater. Something heavy had struck him over and over again, leaving the white bone of his skull gleaming under my flashlight like a pale, accusing moon. And then it hit me. That matted, furry clump I had seen in the hammerman's hand when I first stopped. It wasn't roadkill. It wasn't a rat. It was a human scalp, torn from the head of the poor soul who had stopped to help him. I had been lucky, but I realized then that the road had claimed someone else that night. And as I stood in the dawn light, I knew the man with the hammer was still out there, waiting for the next car to stop. Last year, I learned a lesson I will never forget. Trust your gut. I had the day off work, and since it was a Tuesday, everyone I knew was busy. Bored and wanting a thrill, I decided to head to the local amusement park by myself. I've always been a thrill seeker, though these days, my idea of excitement is staying just a few miles over the speed limit. I arrived around 2 p.m. The park was hauntingly empty for a weekday, while the lack of crowds meant I could ride anything I wanted without waiting. It also left me with a weird, uncanny feeling of emptiness that I couldn't shake. I ignored that sinking sensation and focused on my plan, worked my way up to the big ones, saving my favorite coaster, the Grim Reaper, for the grand finale by 7:30 p.m. With the park closing in 30 minutes, it was time. Earlier that day, I'd met a guy named Charlie while waiting in line, and we'd hit it off, spending the rest of the day riding together. We decided to end the night on the Grim Reaper. The line was short, which made sense given the late hour. But as we stood there, a cold dread coiled in my stomach. Charlie was buzzing with excitement, asking if we could ride it multiple times, but I felt an overwhelming urge to turn around and run. I blamed it on the corn dogs I'd eaten earlier, desperate to rationalize the anxiety, but deep down I knew it was something else. I didn't want to look lame in front of my new friend, so I stayed. There were only about 19 people in line, just enough to fill the coaster's capacity for one last trip. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a physical manifestation of the terror that had taken root in my mind. We ended up in the third car from the front. As the cheesy jingle played over the speakers, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The Grim Reaper will find you dead or alive. Charlie hummed along, grabbing my arm in joy. I just sat there, braced for the worst. The ride operator pulled down the individual shoulder restraints, locking us in. Usually, the snug fit makes me feel secure, but this time, the plastic-coated metal felt like a cage. The operator hit the button, and we shot out of the station like a bullet. Halfway through the ride, I tried to convince myself that my fear was irrational. We hit the final bend, and I waited for the brakes to hiss as they normally did, but they never came. We tore past the loading station, the operators staring in confusion as we blasted by for a second lap. Charlie was beaming, shouting, "Yes, this is awesome." But I was already looking at the terrified faces of the staff. We flew past again, then a third time. By now, the thrill had vanished, replaced by a suffocating panic. The operators were frantic, looking red and worried as they scrambled to coordinate. Some riders were still cheering, but as we entered the sixth lap, a heavy silence began to fall over the car. We saw fire trucks and police swarming the parking lot from the peak of the ascent. They weren't just prepared for a malfunction. They were preparing for a tragedy. They eventually brought out a whiteboard to communicate with us, the ride being too loud for shouting. It read, "Trying to free you at peak." They spent 45 minutes trying to get a ladder truck to reach us, but at 200 feet, they were helpless. Then, the first death occurred. A man in the car behind me, desperate to escape, began thrashing wildly. He wiggled halfway out of his restraint at the very top of the hill. His leg caught on the track, and the sheer force ripped him from his seat, sending him plummeting into the void. His friend, witnessing the horror, suffered a fatal heart attack instantly. The crowd below erupted into a symphony of moans and screams. By the hour mark, the electricity in the park shut down, but the coaster didn't stop. It kept moving, as if fueled by something beyond physics. Family members were allowed into the loading area, their frantic, desperate screaming only adding to our trauma. My mother was there, and watching her beg for my life while I was trapped in this looping death machine was its own kind of torture. At the 3-hour mark, a woman in the loading area broke free from the guards, lunging for the control panel. She hit the release button, unlocking every shoulder restraint on the coaster. Chaos ensued. People jumped, falling to their deaths against the supports and the safety nets below. I managed to hold my restraint down, praying to a God I wasn't sure was listening. Hours bled together. More people died, some from sheer exhaustion, others from the brutal G-forces that cracked their bodies against the seats. When Charlie and I were the only ones left, the park workers attempted one last suicidal plan. They drilled a metal pole into the concrete to snag us with a net. When we hit it, the pole was ripped from the ground and wedged itself into the coaster, causing the ride to shudder violently. The back cars, carrying the remains of the other passengers, broke off and plummeted to the earth. The screaming stopped. It was just me and Charlie, left alone on a roller coaster that refused to die at hour 8. A loose piece of metal on the car ahead began to grind against the track. Charlie, thinking he could save us, contorted his body to grab the sharp edge. It was a mistake. The metal sliced deep into his forearm, severing flesh and bone. I tried to bind his wound with my shirt, but it was like trying to patch a sinking ship with a napkin. He bled out slowly, watching the world fade with a look of strange, quiet relief. When we hit the loop, he was gone, leaving me alone with his cooling body for 2 hours of absolute, silent hell. Finally, I devised a desperate plan. I took off our shoes and threw them into the coaster's mechanism as we passed the loading area. The impact jammed the ride just long enough for me to force myself out of the restraint and jump for the safety net. I hit the ground, broken, bruised, and forever changed. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital, but the physical wounds were nothing compared to the silence of the room where I now sit, trying to get this story out before the park owners wipe it from existence forever. The internet is scrubbed, the incident buried, but I know what happened. If you feel something is wrong, if your gut is screaming at you, Trust it. Don't be polite. Don't be afraid to look foolish. Just run.